Korean Mafia boss, called me just a wife in front of his counsel. Then his attorney pointed to my name on the foundation. Table 7 is asking for the check, Ava. On my way. Hold that image for one moment. Somewhere across the city, in a room full of powerful men, my husband was sitting at the head of a table I had helped him build, describing me to 12 of the most dangerous people in Seoul's financial underworld as just a wife. And I was carrying a tray. 3 years of marriage to Kwon Tae-sung, and I had learned that the distance between what a man says in private and what he says in front of witnesses is the most accurate measurement of who he actually is. I did not know yet what he had said in that room, not that night, not while I was moving through the Meridian's dining floor in my uniform, doing the job I had kept even after the wedding because something in me, some quiet, unbothered part, had always understood that a woman should never let her entire identity dissolve into someone else's name. That instinct, I would later understand, was the most important decision I had ever made. What I did not know, what none of them knew, not Tae-sung, not the council, not the 12 men who had been making decisions about my position for months, was that the most critical document in Kwon Tae-sung's empire already had my name on it. It had always had my name on it. They just never thought to look. The council convened without me. That was not unusual. Tae-sung had always framed his council business as a separate world, one I was adjacent to but not inside. I organized his social calendar, managed his estate dinners, reviewed his correspondence for errors, and kept the kind of quiet competence that powerful households require and powerful men rarely credit. I had told myself this was partnership. I had told myself that visible power and actual influence were different things, and that I had chosen the more sustainable of the two. I had been wrong about what I was choosing. I found out about the Thursday meeting through Min Seo, the council's Hyun's youngest attaché, a precise and quietly decent young man who had always treated me with the specific courtesy of someone who felt guilty about what he was watching happen. He found me in the elevator lobby of the Kwon building 2 days after the meeting. He bowed. He said, "Mrs. Kwon, I want you to know I did not agree with how Thursday was conducted." I looked at him. "What happened on Thursday?" he told me. Councilman Paik, the eldest member, the one who had been with Tae-sung's father before Tae-sung himself, was old enough to sit at the table, had raised a question about the quarterly restructuring. Specifically, about why a signature was required from someone outside what he called the primary family structure. And Kwon Tae-sung, my husband, the man whose home I had organized, whose war room dinners I had catered from personal contacts, whose legal correspondence I had reviewed and filed for 3 years, had answered, "She's just a wife. Her signature is a formality. It carries no real weight here. Just a wife." The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. I rode to the 43rd floor. I walked to the study that everyone called Tae-sung's office, though I had been the one to design its filing system and organize the foundational documents that gave the Kwon Council its original legal standing. I sat at the desk. I opened the bottom drawer, the locked one, the one Tae-sung had never asked about because he had assumed it held personal things, and he had been correct. Everything in that drawer was mine. He simply did not know yet what mine meant in a legal context. I sat for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called a number I had carried for 2 years without using. Attorney Baek Jino answered on the 3rd ring. When I told him my name, he went very quiet. Then he said, "Mrs. Kwon, I have been wondering when you would call. Drop your city in the comments right now. Because if you have ever been called a formality by someone who was standing on what you built, I need you to stay with me." What I did next was not revenge. It was simply the truth, finally refusing to be patient. What the council built over the following 3 weeks was not 1 wound, it was 6. And I let every single one land. Not because I was powerless, because I was waiting for the room to be complete before I spoke. The first, the quarterly restructuring filing, arrived at the penthouse by courier. My name, which had appeared on the Foundation's governance documents since the day of our marriage, had been removed from the public-facing board. I discovered this through the Foundation's own newsletter, which arrived in my email on a Tuesday with a revised leadership page. 7 names listed, mine absent. I called the Foundation's administrative director. She confirmed the instruction had come from Mr. Kwan's office the previous week. I thanked her. I filed the information. The second, the Kwan Group's annual legacy dinner, an event I had organised for 3 consecutive years, personally selecting the venue, the menu sequence, the guest flow, the table architecture. The programme, distributed to 400 guests, listed the event coordination credit as curated by the Kwan Group Executive Office, not my name, not my work, not 3 years of relationships with vendors and planners who had shown up because of me, not because of an office. I read the programme. I set it face down on the table. I ate my dinner. The third, a formal council dinner at the Kwan estate. I arrived in the dining room to find that the seating arrangement had been revised. My chair, the one that had been positioned beside Tae-sung at the head of every previous estate dinner, was gone, not moved to another location, simply absent. A clean gap in the table where my place had been, as though the room had been designed from the beginning without accounting for me. A junior staff member, visibly uncomfortable, offered to bring a chair from the secondary dining room. I said, "That won't be necessary. I'll manage." I stood at the perimeter of that dinner for 2 hours. I spoke when spoken to. I smiled at the correct moments. I watched 12 men eat at a table I had hosted and felt, for the first time, the specific quality of rage that does not express itself as heat, but as absolute clarity. The fourth, Councilman Ri requested, through Tae-sung's office, not through me, never directly, that I provide a summary of the estate management accounts for the previous 18 months, not because the council needed them. Because they wanted to know, apparently, whether any of my operational decisions had created liabilities. I had been managing those accounts since the first month of our marriage. I had never once created a liability. I had, in fact, identified and corrected 3 separate errors in the council's own subsidiary filings. Errors I had flagged quietly to Tae-sung, and which had been corrected without attribution or acknowledgement. I prepared the summary. I sent it. No response. The fifth, a dissolution of marital property agreement arrived at my kitchen counter. Delivered in person by Paik, Ri, and Do. 3 men in formal suits standing in my kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon, as though they had come to inspect a property rather than present legal documents to a human being. Paik placed the folder on my counter, he said. "Mr. Kwan asked us to deliver this and request your signature at your earliest convenience." The agreement was thorough. Residency allowance, monthly settlement, and at the bottom, 1 line that carried more weight than everything above it. Signatory acknowledges all Kwan Group holdings as separate property, relinquishing any claim thereto. I looked at the 3 men in my kitchen. I closed the folder. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I'll be in touch." Paik's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough, into something that was not quite confidence anymore. He had expected a signature. He had perhaps expected tears, or argument, or the particular compliance of a woman who did not yet understand what she held. What he did not know was that 4 days earlier, I had met with attorney Baek Jinyo in a private office on the east side of the city, and that the meeting had lasted 3 hours, and that I had left it with a complete understanding of every document in the locked drawer. The 6th, and the one that made everything else irrelevant, the summons, not an invitation, a summons delivered through Min-seo, who carried the message with the apology of someone who understood the distinction, even if he had not been authorized to acknowledge it. The full council, the 45th floor boardroom, my presence requested, like I was a consultant they were evaluating, like I was someone whose time and position existed at their discretion. I looked at Min-seo, I said, "Tell them I'll be there." Then I called Attorney Baek. I said, "Monday," he said, "I'll be ready." I wore white, a structured cape suit I had purchased 18 months earlier for an occasion I had been waiting to understand, gold jewellery, my hair exactly as I chose it, the black folder under my arm containing documents that not one person in that boardroom had ever read. I arrived at the 45th floor at 9:58. The boardroom held 12 men arranged around a table, with souls spread 45 floors below them like something they believed they commanded. Tai Sung at the head, Paik to his right, the position of the senior advisor, the man who had served this council longer than some of its members had been alive. Ri and Do at the table's midsection, wearing the expressions of men who had already decided how this meeting would end. I noticed one thing immediately. There was no chair for me. Not a removed chair, not a gap. The table had been arranged for 12 people, and 12 chairs had been provided, exactly enough for the council members and Tai Sung, with no accommodation for my presence whatsoever. I had been summoned to a room that had been set up as though I did not exist. I stood at the entrance for 3 seconds. Then I walked to the corner of the room, retrieved the chair used by the boardroom's administrative assistant during note-taking sessions, carried it to the table, and placed it at the end opposite Taesung. I sat down. The room watched this in silence. Taesung said, "Ava, thank you for coming. We wanted to discuss the transition agreement in person." "I appreciate that," I said. "Before we begin, I'd like to introduce someone." The boardroom door opened. Attorney Baek Jino walked in. He was 73 years old. He had represented the Kwon family since before Taesung was born. He had written the original charter that established the Kwon Group as a legally protected holding entity. He had been the only attorney present when the foundational documents were signed 41 years ago by 2 men, one Korean, one American, who had understood that what they were building required a legal architecture strong enough to survive both of them. The room recognized him immediately. Paik straightened. Ri exchanged a look with Do. 2 men at the far end of the table shifted from the posture of people expecting a formality into something more careful. "Jinyosi," Taesung said. His voice was controlled, precisely controlled. "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us, Mr. Kwon," the attorney said, setting his briefcase on the table with the unhurried certainty of a man who had been in more dangerous rooms than this one, and had left all of them standing. "I apologize for the absence of prior's notice. However, what I need to present could not be appropriately communicated through secondary channels." He opened the briefcase. He removed a document sealed with a gold-embossed stamp. He placed it at the center of the table. "This is the original Kwon Monroe Foundational Charter, certified by the State of New York Supreme Court, filed 41 years ago, never amended, never superseded, and, as of this morning, formally re-entered into active legal standing at the petition of its surviving signatory beneficiary." The room was completely quiet. Taesung looked at the document. Then he looked at me. "What is this?" "Attorney Baek is presenting documents," I said. "I'm sitting here." The attorney turned the charter to face the room. He pointed to the bottom. 2 signatures. One Korean, one American. And below the American signature, in the trust inheritance clause that had been drafted by a lawyer sharp enough to understand what 40 years of compounding legal authority actually produces, "Ava Monroe, beneficiary." Paik spoke first. His voice carried the specific authority of a man who had never needed to question his own conclusions. "Mrs. Kwon, with respect, this structure predates your marriage entirely." Attorney Baek looked at him. "Exactly," he said. "That is precisely why her claim is stronger than the marriage." The room processed that. Paik said, "A 40-year-old document cannot supersede current." "It does not need to supersede anything," the attorney said. "It predates the current structure. It is the current structure's foundation. Every holding, every license, every legal protection the Kwon Group operates under was built on top of this charter. You cannot dissolve the floor and expect the building to stand." Ri said, "She married into this family 3 years ago. The suggestion that she holds a foundational position. She was born into this position," the attorney said. "Her marriage to Mr. Kwon was, from a purely legal standpoint, a remarkable alignment of circumstances. Her maternal grandfather, James Elliott Monroe, co-signed this charter with Kwon Taesung's father 41 years ago. He was not a silent investor. He was a co-architect. The trust document makes that distinction with considerable precision. Doe, the man who had delivered dissolution papers to my kitchen counter, put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "The governance board removal." "Yes," the attorney said, "by removing Mrs. Kwon's name from the Foundation's governance structure without her written consent. The Council triggered the Charter's protection clause, which formally escalates her position from beneficiary to co-administrator. He let that land. The dissolution agreement, he continued, which was delivered to Mrs. Kwon's residence last Wednesday, requests that she relinquish any claim to Kwon Group holdings as separate property. However, her position under this charter is not a marital claim. It is a foundational right. A marital separation agreement has no legal authority over a foundational right. They are entirely different instruments, Paik said. This cannot be verified without independent. The Supreme Court seal is on the document in front of you, the attorney said. I have the digital verification code if you would like to confirm it in this room. Paik looked at the gold seal. He did not speak again. What followed was not loud. That is the detail I need you to hold. There was no shouting, no dramatic moment where chairs scraped back or voices escalated. There was something quieter and more final than all of those things. 12 men, in a room they had arranged without a chair for me, understanding, one by one, at different speeds, through different specific routes of calculation, what they had been sitting on top of without knowing. Attorney Baek walked the council through the administrative implications. The restructuring required, the signatures needed, the legal timeline imposed by the Charter's reactivation. He was precise, unhurried, and thorough in the way of a man who had been carrying this knowledge for 41 years, and was finally, in his 73rd year, delivering it to the room it had always been intended for. I watched Tae-sung. He had not looked away from the charter since the attorney pointed to my name. He was doing the kind of accounting that has nothing to do with numbers, tracing back through 3 years of decisions, 3 years of assumptions, 3 years of a marriage he had organized around. A version of me he had constructed entirely without asking who I was before he met me. The chair I had carried from the corner. The locked drawer he had never asked about. The job I had kept at the Meridian even after the wedding. The quiet competence he had described to 12 men as carrying no real weight. "How long?" he said, finally. His voice was lower than his council voice. Something underneath the authority. "How long have you known?" "The documents were in the study," I said. "The locked drawer. You never asked. I thought it was personal things." "It was," I said. "Everything in that drawer was mine. You simply didn't know yet what mine meant. If you are anywhere in the world watching this right now, drop your location in the comments, because what I said next is the thing I had been carrying for 3 years without knowing it had a name, and I need you to hear it." Tae-sung called the council to a brief recess. The 12 men filed out. Some of them looked at me as they passed, not with hostility, with the specific recalibration of people encountering an updated understanding of a situation they believed they had fully mapped. Doe, the last to leave, stopped near my chair. "Mrs. Kwon," he said, "the work you did on the legacy dinner, the vendor relationships, the estate accounts." He paused. "The council benefited from all of it without acknowledging it properly. I want you to know that I am aware of that." "I know you are," I said. "You've always known. That's a different problem than the others." He nodded once. He left. Tae-sung and I were alone in the boardroom. Seoul was below us. 45 floors of city, lit and moving, indifferent to the specific weight of what was happening at the table. He said, "I called you a formality. Yes, in front of the full council. Yes, while you were sitting on a document that..." He stopped, reconsidered. "You didn't know then?" "No," I said. "I found the documents 8 months into the marriage. I didn't understand their full implication until your council removed my name from the governance board. And then I waited," I said. "I wanted to understand the full shape of what I was inside before I moved." He looked at me the way he should have been looking at me for 3 years. Not as an accessory to his authority. Not as a quiet woman who asked no questions, as something you'd been standing next to without having measured correctly. I assumed, he said, that I knew what you were. Yes, I said. That was the error. The first acknowledgement came from Min Siu. He found me in the corridor after the meeting ended. He bowed lower than his rank required. He said, "Mrs. Kwon, you deserved to know sooner. I should have told you the full content of Thursday's meeting the same night." "You told me when you could," I said. "That matters." The second came from Do, a formal phone call to my cell, not to Taesung's office. His voice carried the careful precision of a man choosing words he intended to stand behind. "The council would like to request a meeting at your convenience, Mrs. Kwon, to discuss the restructuring." At your convenience. The emphasis was new. The weight of your convenience had been redistributed entirely. "Attorney Bake will coordinate," I said, through me. "Of course," he said. The third was Paik. He did not call. He wrote a formal letter, handwritten on Kwon Group stationery, delivered by courier to my apartment, 3 paragraphs. The first acknowledged that his characterization of my position during the Thursday council had been procedurally incorrect. The second acknowledged that the governance board removal had been conducted without appropriate consultation. The third, the shortest, and the one I read 4 times, said, "The council was wrong to treat your contribution to this organization as administrative rather than foundational. That distinction should have been made correctly from the beginning." I folded the letter. I placed it in the locked drawer beside the charter, beside my grandfather's signature. Taesung came to my apartment on a Sunday. I had moved out of the penthouse 8 days after the council meeting, to the apartment I had maintained on a separate lease since the first year of our marriage. The one with the window that faced east, the one where my grandmother's photograph sat on the desk beside the locked file box. He stood in the doorway. He had the look of a man who had spent the week doing the specific kind of accounting that costs more than money. "I need to understand something," he said. "Ask. When we met, at the Meridian, you were a waitress." "I was working as a waitress," I said. "Those are different things." He was quiet for a moment. "I never asked what you were before that." "No," I said. "You didn't. Your grandfather built the legal architecture that your father's empire ran on for 40 years, I said. "Yes, I know. I've known for 2 years. I spent most of that time trying to understand why neither family had ever told the other." "Did you ever find out?" "Attorney Bake thinks my grandfather intended for it to find the right moment," I said. "He wrote the charter to activate under pressure. He knew that power only becomes visible when someone tries to take it." Taesung looked at me, at my apartment, at the east-facing window and the photograph on the desk. "I called you a formality," he said, "in front of 12 men. You did, and the whole time, I said, I was the reason those 12 men had a table to sit at." He did not have a response for that. Some truths are not built for response. They are built for sitting with, slowly, until the full weight of them is understood. "Is there anything I can do?" he said finally. "That would." "The restructuring timeline Attorney Bake provided is fair," I said. "I've reviewed it. My involvement going forward will be through the Charter's administrative channel. That's cleaner for everyone." "I mean between us." I looked at him. I thought about the Thursday meeting. I thought about the chair that had not been there. I thought about my name removed from a governance page, my work credited to an office, a dissolution agreement delivered to my kitchen counter by 3 men who expected compliance. I thought about my grandfather's signature beside his father's. 2 men building something together, neither of them knowing that one day their grandchildren would stand in a room where one had called the other a formality, and the other had simply opened a drawer. "The right person," I said quietly, "asks who you are before they need to know." He looked at the floor. He looked back at me. He looked at the door I was holding open at exactly the width required for the conversation we had needed to have, and no further. He nodded once. He left. I closed the door, not with anger, not with grief. With the specific finality of a woman who has stopped waiting for a room to be ready and has simply built her own. 6 months later, the Quan Monroe Foundation opened its restructured headquarters. 2 names on the lobby wall. Side by side, Monroe, Quan. The way they had always been, in a document sitting in a locked drawer for 2 years, waiting for the moment the room was ready to look at it. My grandmother called that morning. She was 81. She had known about the charter her entire life, had known it would pass to me, had known what it contained, had said nothing because, she told me, your grandfather always said the document would find its moment. He said power doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone patient enough to hold it without flinching. I stood at the window of what was now legally, structurally, officially my foundation. I thought about a woman in a uniform at the Meridian, keeping a separate apartment on a separate lease, filing her own documents in her own locked drawer, staying quiet not because she was afraid, but because she was waiting for the room to be complete. She was not a formality. She was never a formality. She was the foundation itself, the thing every other thing had been built on top of for 41 years by men who had never thought to look down. And the day she walked into that boardroom in white, with a black folder and an attorney who had spent 4 decades waiting to point at her name, the room finally looked. Too late, perhaps, but finally. Exactly. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever been called a formality by people standing on what you built, subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. Tell me the moment you understood what you were actually holding. Tell me when you stopped waiting for permission. This channel exists for every woman who kept the right things locked away until the room had no choice but to hear it. Part 2 is coming. Stay with me.